Welcome to the Earning Freedom Podcast. I am Michael Santos with michaelsantos.com and prisonprofessor.com, always striving to provide information that will help people who are going into the criminal justice system, people who are in the criminal justice system, or even people who have just come back from the criminal justice system. That's what the Earning Freedom Mastermind program is all about. It's about showing individuals that regardless of what challenges you have faced in the past, it's never too soon, it's never too late to begin sowing seeds for a life of prosperity, fulfillment, happiness, and relevance. And one of the ways that I try to deliver this message is not only sharing stories and strategies that I learned from masterminds that include Nelson Mandela, Viktor Frankl, Solzhenitsyn, Socrates, and so many others. I also strive to present masterminds who are from contemporary society, people that have faced struggles and difficulty of enormous proportions, but have managed to navigate their way through those struggles with their dignity intact, always focus on building a better life. And today I have the distinct privilege of introducing a true mastermind, an individual that I have a great deal of admiration and respect for, because despite facing enormous challenges of going through multiple decades in prison, he's come back to society strong, with his dignity intact, full of hope and optimism. And during the length of time that he served in prison, he was always productive, always adding value, always striving to reconcile and connect with society. So I think that we all have a lot to learn from my friend, my friend Jimmy Hamiliton, whom I consider a mentor and a friend, and I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to introduce him to you. Jimmy, I want to welcome you to the Earning Freedom program. I'd like to ask you right now, where are you in the world?
Well, I'm living in Cleveland, Ohio. I've been out of prison now for less than 45 days after having served 30 straight calendar years. And, I'm trying to, out here in the world, building my life, just enjoying all of these things that I dreamed about for 30 years and striving to try to put together, as you say, a life that's productive and responsive to the needs of the people around me. And I'm just enjoying it. I'm soaking it up. It's wonderful.
Well, you've been living a productive life for multiple decades, even though you served 30 years in prison. I happen to know because we served time together, when I was probably in my 8th or 9th year of imprisonment. So it was many, many years ago. And I had a great deal of admiration for you then. But why don't we start? We're going to do a series of these videos and podcasts so that people can really learn about what you've gone through and how you positioned yourself for success. Would you mind telling our audience a little bit about your background? How old you were when you went into the system, and what it was like as a young man going in? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was 20 years old when I entered the system. And as you know, my crime was one of violence. And so my sentence I was given a life sentence under the old law and, told that I would have an opportunity for parole, but that wouldn't come for many years. But really, the factors that took me into the system started many years before that. As a young man, I grew up in an interracial family in downtown Cleveland. My family was...
What is an interracial family? Biracial?
Well, my mother had divorced my father and remarried, and my stepfather was black, and my mom was white, and my 2 younger brothers are biracial. And of course, when you're a kid, that doesn't really bother you. But what did bother me, or what affected me, was that in the 70s, interracial families were frowned upon, and we were not permitted to live, even though we could have afforded to live in better neighborhoods. We were not, you weren't really allowed to do that. So I grew up in the inner city. I grew up in downtown Cleveland. And my family life was full of domestic violence and alcoholism. And that affected me into my teenage years. And then at a very young age, my mother was murdered by my stepfather. And that carried over, terribly into my teenage years and drugs and alcohol. And so what I thought would save me was the military. And I joined the military. And
How old were you when you joined the military?
18. I was 18. And I joined the 82nd Airborne Division. I was an airborne paratrooper. I was on the elite 24-hour a 24-hour high alert group where, we were supposed to be able to go anywhere in the world in 24 hours. I was a serious soldier. But the thing that always haunted me as a teenager was my sense of entitlement, my sense of, I felt like because I had a terrible childhood, because of these scars, that people owed me and I could do whatever I wanted. And I had no real responsibility to the society around me. And that was poison. That was horrible.
You said, Jimmy, that you had some issues with substance abuse as a young man. When did those issues begin, and what type of substances were you abusing?
Oh, I did everything. I started smoking marijuana when I was very young, and this was the 80s, so we were taking pills and snorting cocaine and LSD. Huh?
How old were you? I know you went to prison when you were 20. So how old were you when you started doing drugs?
Oh, I was 15 when I really started to do drugs, and it just carried over with all these terrible behaviors. Even the people around me, I stole from the people that cared about me. I had teachers in high school because I was always fairly intelligent and smart in school, and people cared about me. Even then, as you say, even then I had mentors and avatars who wanted to reach out to me, who wanted to help me, but I couldn't see it. And I ignored their pleas and I ignored their help. And, subsequently I crashed and burned in society.
Sometimes it's hard for us to really accept mentors that we don't identify with, particularly when we're in struggle. I know that was the case with a lot of guys in prison. Some of them were resistant to really embracing the positive message and programs that might be available because they don't sense that the people who are delivering the program have ever experienced real hardship, like being in prison or being separated from the people we love or the people who love us. Mm-hmm. Certainly that's not the case with anybody who's participating in the Earning Freedom program, because they know that everybody we are presenting are individuals who have actually walked through those puddles of blood, been locked up, faced enormous struggle, but yet figured out a way to reject the criminal lifestyle, reject the negativity, and focus on success. And you have certainly are really a shining example of somebody who was able to do that. Now, you were telling us about making some bad decisions as a young man. Then you spoke a little bit about going into the military. How is it that you, it sounds like you were on a path to reforming your life if you go into the military. How is it that you got sucked up into the criminal justice system?
Well, the problem with the military, the discipline of the military was very good for me. But, the people in the military are the same people that are in the world. And if you're not on a path of positive adjustment, if you're not looking for the good that's in society or in life, you're not going to find it. And I was not on that path. So all I did was gravitate back to the same people who were doing wrong. That's one of the things that I found in one of the mentalities in prison. We think that just because we feel like we're going to do right, we surround ourselves with good people. We think it's all going to be good. But if you're not striving to be positive, if you're not motivated to make a change in your life, all you're going to do is drift back to the same people and the same behaviors that you were engaged in before. You can't fight it. It's just the natural course of human activity. So when I was in prison, I found myself surrounded by, guys who would...
What brought you to prison? How did the whole criminal justice proceeding work itself out? You were arrested. Tell us about that, because you're a young man. Tell us about that.
Well, when I was arrested, I was involved in a conspiracy for murder, as you may have remembered, and my co-defendant was involved. He had already been under the surveillance of the authorities. So as soon as I committed the crime, they arrested him. They followed him directly to me. So I was in the prison system. They were threatening me with, life imprisonment and, talking about how I would never go home. And, they treated me, I was thrown in a tank with, all the people in the tank were in for murder. We were all murderers, quote, murderers. And, some of them were state criminals facing death penalty in North Carolina. It was an incredible experience. So how long did you go through the criminal justice proceedings before you were actually sentenced to life in prison? I was in for 14 months. I stayed in the county jail for 14 months.
Where did they send you to in the federal system?
Oh, well, they sent me to my first stop. As you might remember, in the old days under the old law, you had to process into the system. So back then, there were certain penitentiaries that processed people in. I was sent to Lewisburg for about 6 months. I stayed in G Block in Lewisburg, which was an incredible experience. And then,
tell us about that experience as a young man of 20 years old or 21 years old going into G Block at Lewisburg. Walk us through that a little bit.
Well, I was incredibly scared. I was scared to death. Lewisburg is a very old facility. It's very dark. It's very depressive. The rocks. I mean, the wall at Lewisburg is built from rocks. You know, it's not like a concrete wall. It's huge. The nickname is the monastery because it looks like an old monastery. It's dark and built from rocks. And then they have what they call the Red Top, which is the main corridor in Lewisburg. And I remember all the lieutenants would stand out there and they would harass the guys. They'd be like, "Hey, newbie, what are you doing on my Red Top?" Or don't, the new guys would go by and they would tell the old cons, they would say, "Hey, don't spill none of that new guy's blood on my Red Top." You know, so you felt the intimidation that was just flowed through the whole institution. It was incredible. I never forget it.
Were you restricted to G Block, or were you able to go walk the main line at Lewisburg?
Oh, you were allowed to walk the main line at certain hours. They had open movement for the incoming population because we weren't general population, but we weren't locked down. They let us move through during the days. And at rec hour, we were allowed to go down to rec, and back then the system still had weights in it, so we would go and lift weights and stuff. But one of the things that anybody who's ever been to Lewisburg will remember is the Chow Hall. The Chow Hall in Lewisburg has towering.
It's quite beautiful, though. The architecture is really pretty there at the Chow Hall at Lewisburg.
It is. It's kind of amazing. It's funny that where you find beauty in these things, and they still had stained glass windows in the Chow Hall at Lewisburg.
That medieval chandelier that hangs down is just
and it was crazy. But I was very scared and I was very intimidated.
So after Lewisburg, you got classified, and where did they send you?
They sent me to USP Terre Haute in Indiana, and back then, now they've built a new one, and the old penitentiary is an FCI. But I was in the old one when it was a USP. And I was there with a lot of notorious guys, Joey Testa from some of the old gangster books and some guys from...
How long were you at USP Terre Haute?
I was there for 7 years.
So while you were there, Jimmy, that's about the same length of time that I started in the USP, I guess. What was your mindset? You go in there as a young man, substance abuse issues hanging around people who have a criminal mentality, a very serious crime. Was the conviction for murder or attempted murder?
No, it was for murder, first-degree murder.
So conviction for first-degree murder, facing life imprisonment under the old law. Tell our audience a little bit about the mindset of what you wanted to do while you were incarcerated.
Well, in the beginning, Mike, my mindset was the same. It was horrible. I felt like, I had been wronged and the world owed me. And, I didn't have any regard for myself. I didn't care about my family. I was just going to do whatever I wanted to do, however I felt good, making the time go by. When I first got to Terre Haute, I was still smoking marijuana. We would get high. I would lift weights and I grew a beard and hung out with the tough guys and tried to act like a convict. I was in that mold. I thought that was what I was supposed to be. That's what I was supposed to do. And I fell right into it at first. That's what, I was right there, F this. And, I didn't want to program at all. And, I just did what I wanted to do. And
what kind of issues, what kind of disciplinary infractions did you encounter while you were there at the initial start of your journey?
Oh, I had possession of alcohol, possession of marijuana. I got in a fight. They found a shank in the room with me and a couple other guys. Everything that you can think of. I mean,
you did a lot of shoot time then in those early years.
I did some shoot time. I did some shoot time for that and for under investigation. Because, if you hang with the wrong people, if you're in a group that's constantly doing bad things, you're going to go to the hole for more than just going to the hole. They're going to lock you up just for investigation and for other stuff, lockdown purposes. So.
Well, certainly our listeners who are locked inside of prisons and jails, they understand that well enough. What could you help us understand a little bit about what brought the turning point and where it came in your experience? When did you start to say, I've had enough of this, I want to start changing my life? Because by the time I met you, you'd already been in prison for probably 8 or 10 years, and you were well on your way to becoming the educated, well-spoken man that you are today. Tell us what inspired that change in you.
Well, there were a sequence of things that came about, but I remember the very first incident that really woke me up and made me realize the path that I was on. I had been working out for a number of years, and my workout partners and I, we're bikers and tough guys, and I had a goatee and my head was shaved, and I took some pictures out on the rec yard with myself and my workout partners, and we were standing up against the brick wall, and the prison, you're flexing and you're gritting and everything. And so I got that picture and I sent it home to my grandmother. And now you have to remember, my grandmother is the one that raised me and tried to take care of me after my mother was killed. And my grandmother sent that picture back to me, Michael. She sent it back to me with a note that said, I don't know who this man is, but don't ever send pictures of him home again, because that's not my grandson. And that was like a slap in the face. And that woke it. I can't say that pushed me very far along in my journey, but that definitely was the line when I crossed and I said, wait a minute, who am I becoming that my own grandmother doesn't even want to know me? Who am I? What choices have I made in my life that I'm so far gone that the one person that took me in when my whole world was falling apart, she took me in and gave me love. Now she doesn't even want to know me. How can this be good? How can these choices be right if that's the case? And I remember from then on, my eyes were kind of open, and I started to really look around me and see what was going on.
Jimmy, I'm so glad that you shared that story, because I know a lot of the people who are incarcerated, they get so caught up in building their prison reputation, in trying to distinguish themselves inside of those walls, that they lose perspective of how those decisions are going to influence the people who care about them, the people that they want to build support networks around. And as a consequence of that, they find many of those people end up going into this spiral where they make a series of cascading bad decisions that expose them to more sanctions in prison, that limit their opportunities to transition into lower security levels, that limit their opportunities to bring positive forces into their life, because just as you experience where your own loving grandmother is ashamed and doesn't want to have a connection to you, neither do other mentors in society. Exactly. So I'm really glad that you shared that story. I hope that our listeners will also recognize that the decisions they are making while they're inside of an institution have a direct impact on opportunities that may open or prospects for success, both in prison and beyond. And so it's really important for them to hear that message, not so much from staff members or counselors or the clergy, but rather from people like you, masterminds who've gone through multiple decades in prison, return to society, and are reflecting on what they wish they would have done differently at the earliest stages of their journey. And maybe I'm putting words into your mouth, but why don't you tell us a little about what looking back, reflecting, what would have been helpful to you in a more positive adjustment pattern at the earliest stages of your journey, Jimmy?
In the very beginning, I wish that I had understood my own role in changing my life. And when I say that, for me, one of the biggest mental aspects of change was when I finally stood and looked in the mirror and took responsibility for the change that I wanted in my life. Instead of looking and saying, oh, somebody should love me more, or other people should do this for me, or what. When you fully accept that you are the source of the change in your life, and you begin to build yourself and build your life in a way that other people attracts other people to do the things that you want them to do. I wish that I had known that from the beginning. I wish that I had recognized that from the beginning, because I didn't. And I lived a destructive lifestyle still for 4 or 5 years in prison before I began to change.
We're listening to Jimmy Hamilton, a mastermind of overcoming struggle and adversity. Jimmy Hamilton was sentenced to a life prison term when he was 20 years old. He was just telling us about some of the challenges that he faced in the earliest stages of his journey. But after about 4 or 5 years, he had an epiphany when his grandmother rejected a photograph of him scowling and putting on that prison mug shot. And tell us, Jimmy, how your life changed after your grandmother sent that photo back to you.
Well, after that, I went to work in Unicor, and everybody knows, I went to work in Unicor. All the guys in the federal prison, they know what Unicor is. A lot of the state prisons.
Our audience doesn't know what Unicor is. Tell us a little bit about what Unicor is.
Unicor is the factory network that a lot of prisons have. It's a more structured job program. It's better pay. For me, that was the first step to learn how to live a regular, normal life where I took care of myself and didn't expect other people to take care of me. I got up every day and went to work. I managed my own money. I took care of my money. I started to save my money. And those small incremental steps began to create an attitude in me where more positive, other inmates who were more positive and were also looking for positive things and positive ways of life, they became attracted to me, and more opportunities opened up to me.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly the lesson plans that we try to teach through the Earning Freedom Mastermind course. It begins with establishing our values and our goals, and then going forward with 100% commitment, the right attitude, having an aspiration of how we want to emerge, taking those incremental action steps, holding ourselves accountable, becoming aware of opportunities that are available to everybody around us. But simultaneously, when we're on that path, the world becomes aware of us. And that's really the essence of what Jimmy just described happened to him. Once he made that commitment to start changing his life, he took the incremental action steps, and you get closer and closer and closer to becoming the individual that we all aspire to become, which is individuals who can lead a life of meaning and relevance and contribution. And I know that Jimmy really got there. In fact, when I met him, he was already well on that path. Now, Jimmy, you were still in the penitentiary. You were working in the Unicor factory.
Yeah.
Tell us about what else you were doing with your time with regard to your free time. How did you structure that time while in a security penitentiary at USP Terre Haute?
Well, growing up, we had always heard, and I'm sure that everybody who's listening to this knows, you grow up and you hear these things about, you should read Shakespeare, or you should read so-and-so. And we don't do it because we're in high school and we're ripping and running, or we're young men and we don't think that these things really apply to us. But I picked these things up and I began to read, as you've said, Viktor Frankl, and Shakespeare was a big one for me. I began to read Shakespeare, and that one really touched me. Dostoevsky, these authors who have written what we call classics. They're classics for a reason. They're classics because the essence of human life has been the same for across generations and generations. And the struggles that we have today in many ways are the same struggles that have been borne by human society for years and years. And so I began to read. I used a lot of those lessons to look at the world around me as a filter. I joined the JCs. I became the president of the JCs, which was an organization that we used to have in prison. And perhaps most importantly, I went back to school. I pursued my education, which was a huge step for me. Beginning the process of getting my college degree, not only for educational benefits, but just for the step taken, that I undertook it by myself. I paid for it by myself. I got Unicor scholarships. I didn't ask my family to help me or anything. I did what I could do on my own. And it felt good for me every single day that I went to school. Every time I got an A on a test, it made me realize that I was capable of changing my own life. And that was huge for me, Michael, huge.
Were you able to do that inside of the penitentiary, or did that start later?
No, I was able to start inside the penitentiary. I had access to some courses. I took some correspondence courses also. There are still universities where we can take correspondence courses in the prison. I know it was very expensive, and I understand that, and that's why I had to go to work. That's why I got Unicor scholarships to assist me in paying for that. But I strove, I made it a priority in my life to get these things done and to make it happen. And it was instrumental.
Can you tell us a little bit about how staff began to respond to you when you made this change? Was there a difference in what you told us before, that you were frequently locked up in segregation because of the people with whom you associated and so on, under investigation, you got involved in disciplinary infractions? How did staff members adjust their influence or their perceptions of you as you made a change in your own adjustment?
Well, I think one thing that I really want to stress, and I think it's very important, is that none of this stuff happened overnight. A lot of times when guys change, they think that because they've dedicated, they've decided that they want to be honest or they want to work hard, that the people around them are just going to, they're going to snap their fingers and everybody's just going to accept their efforts. And that's not how it works. You have to establish yourself. You're not honest because you decide one day to be honest. You're honest because the people around you hear the truth from you day after day after day after day. You're not a hard worker because you work hard 1 or 2 days. You're a hard worker because you set up a track record where you come to work every day and you work hard, and people learn that they can depend on you and that you're responsible. And as I began to build that, that's when people looked at me and they said, maybe he is worth the effort that I would have to put in to help him. And that's when staff members did begin to treat me differently. They began to, offer me opportunities that they might not be willing to offer other inmates. The supervisor,
or they may not have been willing to offer you those opportunities 2 or 3 years previously before they saw that your adjustment.
Yeah, they never did. See, that was another thing. There were a number of positive things going on in the prison that I never even knew about, because people weren't willing to open that door to me because they knew that I wasn't responsible. They knew that I wouldn't do it, or I wouldn't treat it seriously. So they didn't even open that door to me. But once I became serious about my own, rehabilitation is the word we always use in prison. Once I became serious about my own rehabilitation, people opened doors to me and showed me things that I didn't even know were there before.
Well, we have come to the end of this first episode of this inspiring story about Jimmy Hamiliton, an individual who went to prison with a life sentence when he was 20 years old, but then built a path over multiple decades of reconciling with society and contributing to society and striving to become just a better human being. And in episode number 2, we're going to talk a little bit more about his journey through 30 years in federal prison. And then we'll have a follow-up episode where we are talking about Jimmy's return to society after 30 years in federal prison. I'd like to continue this as an ongoing series for those of you who would like to follow on Success After Prison podcast or the Earning Freedom podcast. We will be following Jimmy's adventures of coming back to society after 30 years in prison, the successful life that he builds, and more importantly, sharing messages about what if you are going through struggle right now, what you can be doing to begin positioning yourself for a successful journey in prison, through struggle, and more importantly, beyond, to the successful life you are going to create. So Jimmy, could you hang around and start another episode with us?
Sure, no problem, Mike. I'm here.
Awesome. So, okay, we're going to conclude this episode. I am Michael with michaelsantos.com, and this is part of the Earning Freedom podcast, the Success After Prison podcast. We have it on video and on audio. If you'd like more information, just visit Michael at michaelsantos.com, and we'll have show notes available with some even contact information to Jimmy Hamiliton. Thanks so much. Be back with another inspiring episode right after this.